Hey guys, so I was thinking about it. What is the best way to explain the transition in his style, in his palette, from whatever it was to whatever it was going to be? And it occurred to me that his self-portraits is probably a very good illustration. So if you look at this self-portrait, look at um, the colors. You've got the poo colors in full view. This is actually quite a bright portrait compared to the potato eaters and so on. But compare that to this. So there it is in a nutshell. It is looking at the same thing and putting a lot more color into the same subject than you may have wanted to or needed to, right? Can you see there's so much more movement and emotion and, I don't know, rippling beneath the surface in this portrait than in this one? And so that is really what we're talking about in a nutshell, right? And so that's where we are in our story at the moment. We are trying to get to Paris, and we are going to deal with letter number, well, the 28th of December, 1885. But that is what I want you to try and keep an eye on is the the slow creep in a good way of color and movement and texture and some kind of bristling um, life force that starts to infect his art. It's no longer this sort of static brown traditional attitude of looking at something. It is now far more lively and far more, in a way, visceral, right? Okay, so we're gonna dive into this letter ASAP. Let's have a look at who's here. Kristen Baxter says, it's such a lovely sentence. It really reminds me of life. Okay, I'm not quite sure what that's about. I must say I've been editing a video for the past 2, 3 hours. And if you think about it, I could have done a live in the time that I did just editing, and the editing's still not finished. Yeah, it's one of the what do you call it? The perils of being a certain kind of YouTuber. I just didn't really want to do an analysis of Netflix that sort of wishy-washy. I wanted it to be quite anchored in specific things. So anyway, there you go. Sharon, good to see you. Kristen. Yeah, I don't know what quote you're referring to. I guess I missed it. Let's see if I can find it. It is overpowering that anyone can see so much color. Is that in, is that, uh, I guess what I don't understand is, so got to be a quote dealing with the letters we're dealing with. Is that a quote dealing with the letters that we're dealing with? In other words, related to the time period that we're dealing with. Uh, is it Kelsey or Gelsey? I'm not quite sure. Timmy is saying hello. Okay. I saw Stephanie a little bit earlier. Are you still here? I'm not quite sure if I understand what you're trying to get at there. The Netflix series is someone else's viewpoint. I don't quite understand what that means. Okay, it's in a letter to his brother. Okay, so let me rephrase that. While I'm reading through these letters tonight, um, please keep an eye open for texts that I'm going to be going through during the live that would make a good sentence. Maybe I needed to be a bit more explicit. Oh, Chelsea. Okay. So I was wrong in both g, and so it's ja. Okay. Okay, cool. But that is a good quote. That is a good quote. I suppose I needed to be a bit more specific in the the context that we wanted to do it. Okay, shall we get going? I may need to jump off here in a moment just to finish something I was doing. I'll just be like a minute, but let's kind of get going. Everyone doing well? Okay. I hope my voice is going to handle this. Okay. So you may remember we did look at this portrait, and we said that it's starting to show a little bit more life than his other portraits, but obviously it's got some way to go before we get to this sort of level, right? It's still far from the look how bright the background is, look how bright the eyes are, look how bright the lips are, look how bright that the I'm not sure if that's a tie or, but anyway, you know, his coat is full of color. So he's obviously got some way to go from there. Do you see that? And so what you want to see is how he makes that transition in terms of his experiences, and also in terms of his painting by painting, that process. Good to see you doing well. Okay. Okay, so here we go. Dear Theo, this is 28th December, 1885. Dear Theo, it's more than time I thank you for the 50 franc you sent, which enabled me to get through the month. Although from today onwards, things will be more or less back to normal. But a few more studies have been done, and the more I paint, the more progress I think I make. The moment I received the money, I took on a beautiful model. Oh, that tells you everything, doesn't it? The moment I got the money, I had a model. Aha. And did a life-size painting of her. It's all quite light except for the black hair. Yet the head itself stands out. By the way, it's not this painting that he's talking about. Yet the head itself stands out in tone against the background into which I've tried to put a golden glimmer of light. That painting has been lost. One does wonder where that painting is. Is it Ash somewhere? Is it in some attic? Who knows? Anyway, here is the color range. A flesh color full of tonal values, with more bronze in the neck, jet black hair, black, which I had to do with carmine and Prussian blue, off-white for the little jacket, little light yellow, much lighter than the white for the background, a touch of flame in the jet black hair, and again a flame-colored bow in the off-white. She's a girl from the Cafe Chantant, and yet the expression I was looking for was somewhat ecce homo like. I'm not quite sure what that means. I've seen it before. I'm not quite sure what it means. Ecce homo are the Latin words used by Pontius Pilate in the Vulgate translation of the Gospel of John when he presents a scourged Jesus, obviously after he's been whipped, bound, and crowned. It means behold the man. Okay. But still, I don't quite know what he means in terms of what kind of expression is he talking about. He says, I was aiming for the truth. I also wanted to put my own thoughts into it. So he's not just painting someone, he's trying to do something more, right? And you can see he's starting to succeed in that with this sort of thing. He's trying to say more than simply what a photograph would say, right? He's trying to communicate something in addition, and a lot more than what that says. Okay. When the model arrived, it was obvious she had quite a few busy nights, and she said something that was fairly characteristic. For me, champagne doesn't cheer me up. It makes me very sad. Then I knew how matters stood and tried to produce something voluptuous and at the same time heartrending. So I don't know. Don't you feel a little disappointed that we can't actually see that artwork? I'm pretty interested in what it was. So it seems a bit of a waste that we can't see it. Then he says, I've started a second study of the same subject in profile. Okay, so this is the same woman. This is the same woman. And he describes her as voluptuous. Okay, maybe we're not missing out in that much. Okay. Apart from that, I've done the portrait about which, as I told you, I've been negotiating and a study of the same head for myself. And now, during these last few days of the month, I'm hoping to paint another head of a man. I feel very cheerful, especially as far as work is concerned, and being here is doing me good. I imagine that no matter what the girls may be, one can make money painting them sooner than anything else. Well, will that turn out to be true? No. There's no denying that you can be damn beautiful and that it is in keeping with the times that just that kind of painting should be gaining ground. Nor can there be any objections to that from the highest artistic standpoint. Painting human beings, that was the old Italian art, that was Millet, and that is Breton. So we're going to come back to this later, but something that was quite unexpected today was um, after dinner, bear in mind it's midnight here at the moment, but after dinner, I was watching Around the World in 80 Days, quite a crappy, it's almost, I think, made for children. It sort of features Jackie Chan and other actors. But what's quite interesting is I think all of this plays out in the time of Van Gogh because Van Gogh does sort of a cameo in the mythos of the story. And there's a kind of a funny moment where Phileas Fogg says to a French lady who's part of the trio traveling around the world, he says to her something like, I've had enough of your impressionist. Damn, what was the word that he used? Not malarkey, but oh damn, I'm gonna have to go back and find out what she said. But I don't know, it was just so he was basically implying that impressionism is a joke. But of course, at that time, nobody knew what it would become. Uh, yeah, it is kind of a B movie. I'm just trying to think what exactly he said. It kind of amounted to, I'm tired of hanging around you and your impressionist nonsense. But yeah, anyway, it just slipped my mind now. Okay, anyway, let's go back to this letter. I'll have to go back and see. I haven't finished watching it, so we'll see. Okay, so anyway, and so in the movie he goes around the world like in a balloon, and all that kind of thing, and that movie plays out in the time of Van Gogh, which I think is quite interesting as well. Gives you a sense of context. Anyway, um, so he goes on to say the only question is whether one should start from the soul or from the clothes, and whether one allows the form to serve as a peg for hanging ribbons and bows from, or if one looks upon the form as a means of conveying an impression, a sentiment, or again, if one does modeling for the sake of modeling, because it is such an infinitely beautiful thing to do. Only the first is ephemeral and the other two are high art. Now, you kind of get the sense when you read a letter like this that there's a lot more thinking going on uh, in terms of the execution of a picture like this than it seems, right? There's quite a complicated process going on behind the scenes, but at the same time, maybe he's trying too hard to achieve something because whatever he's trying to do here, this doesn't seem a terribly moving picture. No matter how sophisticated the motive and the meanings rendered, if the picture doesn't reach you in some way, then you can write a book about what you were trying to say, but if the picture doesn't in a way speak to you on its own, well then it's actually a failure, right? Okay. Then he says, what rather pleased me was that the girl who posed me wanted to have one of the portraits for herself, preferably just like the one I'd done, and that she's promised to let me paint a study of her in a dancer's costume at her room as soon as possible. So, what do you think about that? Do you think she really wanted the portrait, or do you think she's trying to sort of manipulate Van Gogh to say, "Wow, you're an incredibly good artist. I'd love to do this again." And bear in mind, I think he's paying her money, and trying to sort of pretend that she really likes him and really likes his art. Or do you think she's genuinely genuine? What do you think? Yeah, I think it's also manipulative, Bridget. Okay. Bridget, I'm glad to have you live. I know you had to watch the other one in on replay, so good to have you here. He says it can't be done right away because the man who runs the cafe where she stays objects to her posing. But she's about to take lodgings with another girl, and both she and the other girl would like to have their portraits done. So yeah, you've got a little bit of intrigue. The man who runs the cafe doesn't want this girl posing, and you know, it's kind of a similar situation to what he had back home. People sort of disapproving, and think about what's going on. Sometimes a woman posing is taking all her clothes off in front of an artist that she doesn't know, and what happens after that, right? Um, he says, I really very much hope that I'll get her back, for she has a remarkable head and she's witty. I'm sure that's all it's about, all that it's about. However, I must first get into practice because it certainly takes a special knack. They don't have much time for all patience. Actually, the work needn't be the worst for being done fairly quickly, and one must be able to paint even if the model doesn't sit stock still. So that is something else is that's going to change about him. He's going to pick up the pace when he paints portraits or otherwise, right? And that is one of the idiosyncrasies of Van Gogh's work is it's painted super fast. Then he says, well, you can see that I'm working with a will. Remember, he was saying not that long ago when he needed money, he was saying to his brother that he felt faint. He was saying that he felt weak. And then now that he's got money, again, was he trying to manipulate his brother or was he literally starving? But anyway, he's now got money and he is feeling stronger, right? He says, if I could sell something so that I could earn a bit more, I should work even harder. Well, that's not about to happen. As for Portier, I haven't lost heart yet, but poverty is dogging my steps, and at present, all dealers are suffering a little more from the same defect, that of being more or less a people withdrawn from society. They are so much sunk in gloom that how is one really to feel inspired to go grubbing about in all that indifference and apathy? The more so as the disease is contagious. So he's talking about the um, the mood is in terms of art is indifferent and apathetic. Um, he has also a rare admission of that he's struggling. He says, "Poverty is dogging my steps. Poverty is dogging my steps." I wonder if that's not a good a good title for this episode. Let's see if we can find one that's better than that. Then he goes on to say, so please write that down, otherwise I'll probably forget about it. Poverty is dogging my steps. Then he says, for it's just a lot of nonsense that business is slack. One has to work with self-confidence and enthusiasm, in short, with some zeal. She's kind of just saying, you know, it's not an excuse if there's the industry sort of reaching a low point. You've got to just work harder. You've got to match that. You've got to match that indifference with, or you've got to outmatch that indifference with zeal, in his words. Yeah, so the lack of money is something that he's been dealing with, that's a total constant, right? That is part of his life, ultimately. Okay. As for Portier, you wrote to me yourself that he was the first to show the impressions and that he was overwhelmed by Durand-Ruel. Well, one is bound to conclude from this that he has the initiative not just to say things, but also to do them. It could be put down to his 60 years, however, and anyway, perhaps it was just one of those many cases when, at the time, when paintings were all the rage and trade was doing well, a great many intelligent people were being wantonly brushed aside, excuse the pun, as if they were incompetent and of no importance, simply because they couldn't bring themselves to believe that the sudden rage in painting and the enormous rise in prices would last. Now that business is hanging fire. One sees those same dealers who were so very enterprising a few years ago, let's say about 10 years ago, turning more or less into blah, 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 and we haven't yet seen the end of it. Personal initiative with little or no capital is perhaps the seed corn for the future. We shall see. Van Gogh kind of has this attitude that he doesn't like the snooty side of art. He wants art to be accessible. He wants his art to be accessible. And one does wonder what he would say about his art. If he could be sitting here talking to us, how do you feel about the fact that your art is pretty much inaccessible to 99.99 literally percent of the population? How would you feel about that? Then he says, yesterday I saw a large photograph of a Rembrandt. I didn't know, right? A photograph of a Rembrandt. Now he's looking at photos of paintings. That's relatively new in this era. I was tremendously impressed by it. It was the head of a woman, the light falling on breast, throat, chin, the tip of the nose, and the lower jaw, forehead and eyes in the shadow of a large hat, with feathers that are probably red, probably more red or yellow in the low neck jacket, dark background, the expression of a mysterious smile like that of Rembrandt himself, in his self-portrait with Saskia on his knee and a glass of wine in his hand. I think Saskia was Rembrandt's wife. My thoughts are full of Rembrandt and Holst these days, not because I see many of their paintings, but because I see so many types among the people here that remind me of that period. I still keep going to those dance halls to look at the heads of the women and of the sailors and soldiers. One pays an entrance fee of 20 or 30 centimes and drinks a glass of beer, for there isn't much hard drinking, and one can have a first-rate time all evening, or at least I can, just watching the people's high spirit. So you kind of get this weird sense that he, when certainly at this moment, when Van Gogh socializes, he kind of is a bit of a creep. He sort of goes to a dance hall and just looks at people, isn't really seem to do anything, isn't really talk to anyone, isn't really dance with anyone. He basically just goes there and kind of hangs around, right? He says, I must do a lot of work from the model. It's the only way to ensure real progress. He says, I've discovered that my appetite has been held in check a bit too long. I wonder what he means by that. Do you think it's his appetite for food? And when I received your money, I couldn't stomach, yeah, so there's that. I couldn't stomach any food. So I guess he's been on what do they call it? It's a way of one of the ways you lose weight. I guess he's doing intermittent fasting, right? Except it's not by choice. Then he says, but I shall certainly do my best to remedy that. It doesn't take away from the fact that I have all my wits and energy about me when I'm painting. but when I'm out of doors, work in the open air is too much for me, and I come over all week. Now, I think the other thing to note, besides the whole transition from this style to that style, we also want to sort of deal with the issue of, let's just see if there's another portrait here. We also want to deal with the question of his health. At what point does he start becoming sick in terms of an STD, and also at what point does he start drinking? And you can imagine that although Paris is a tonic in a way for his art, although Paris is a shot in the arm that he needs, it's also a quid pro quo. He benefits in a sense from the art scene, but he also becomes in a way badly influenced. He also drinks, he also womanizes far more than he's doing over here. And so in a sense, it's two steps forward for his art in a way, but then a step back in terms of his entire life expectancy, in terms of his mental health, right, and all that kind of thing. He's also going to, yeah, that's it. He's also going to, when he's in Paris, he's going to start annoying the crap out of his brother. So him and his brother have quite a good relationship when it's from a distance. But when he actually lives with his brother finds him selfish, not only selfish, like that he can be sensitive and considerate, but he can also be an arsehole. And that's kind of a new side to Van Gogh that we're going to see. I'd love to play you the part from the BBC that deals with that, but we're not in Paris yet, so I'll do it in the next episode. Yeah, it was kind of a den of iniquity. The other thing that's not known that well, something that's not so well known, is that Theo was also going to these brothels, and Theo was also drinking, and Theo was also part of that whole art scene. And in a sense, and as I say, this is not very well understood or recognized, Theo actually died earlier than Van Gogh in terms of his age, right? So it actually shows that Theo was even more of a party animal than his brother. It's quite interesting, given that their father was a minister and the sort of background that they came from, right? Of course, we're related. I'm a distant cousin of Van Gogh, of course. Yes, he does. Yeah, the married brother. Okay, so let's continue. Well, painting is something that wears one out. However, van der Loo, the Van Gogh's doctor in Brabant, he said, when I consulted him shortly before I came here, that I'm reasonably strong, that I needn't despair of reaching the requisite age to produce a complete body of work. So it seems like he even was wondering what his lifespan would be, fairly recent to this letter. And well, the doctor turned out to be wrong, but the doctor probably couldn't predict what he was going to do going forward in Paris and beyond. He said, I told him that I knew several painters who, for all their nervousness, had reached the age of 60 or even 70, fortunately for themselves, and that I should like to do the same. Can you see that that is someone who isn't suicidal, that is kind of saying, I would like to reach the age of about 70, despite, challenges, despite poverty, despite whatever. So at this point, even though he's been struggling, he says, I would actually like to live to about 70, and he would live just beyond half that milestone. He died at the age of 37, which is pretty young. I also believe that if one aims for serenity and retains one's zest for living, one's state of mind helps a great deal. So is talking about how to develop resilience and how to achieve longevity, right? In his 30s. He's only going to live another 5 years, but you hear him talking about zest for living, his approach to dealing with troubles in a positive way, in an optimistic way, in a Team Peachtree way. He's not saying, you know what, I'm really struggling and I'm depressed and maybe I should give up. Instead, he's being very affirmative, right? He says, in that respect, I've gained by coming here, for I have new ideas and new means of expressing what I want. So can you see when he's in a, sorry, let's just bring this up. When he is um, optimistic and healthy, his art output increases. It kind of stands to reason. And that is exactly what happened in the last 2 months of his life. In fact, his art output was probably the highest that it ever was. And yet people want to convince you that he was depressed, that he was hopeless, and that he's painting all of this art because he means to take his own life, really. Would an artist that means to take his own life paint day in and day out without interruption and then suddenly just, why wouldn't any of that darkness start infecting his paintings, which are so expressionistic, so vivid? Why wouldn't that shadow, that despair start infecting his letters? It doesn't either. He says, I'm very excited by the two colors, carmine and cobalt. Well, we're not seeing it so far in your art. Cobalt is a divine color, and there's nothing as fine for putting an atmosphere around things. Obviously, cobalt blue. And obviously, you see that sort of thing here. Sorry, not there, there. Can you see that's kind of like a cobalt blue in the background? Let's do it like that. Okay. Then he says, carmine is the red of wine and is warm and lively like wine. The same goes for emerald green. All of those colors are really present here. Red, green, blue, right? He says it's false economy to dispense with them, with those colors, cadmium as well. Something about my constitution that has pleased me a great deal is that a doctor in Amsterdam with whom I once discussed a few things that sometimes made me think that I wasn't long for this world. So he's thinking a little bit about his mortality. Do you remember that he actually went to hospital for a while he was seeing Scene, remember? And she then went to visit him in hospital. So he's already been hospitalized for his health a couple of times, but now he feels like he's kind of ship shape. He says, what does he say? I was absolutely delighted that this doctor took me for an ordinary worker, saying, I dare say you're an iron worker by trade. So he's basically saying that he was quite impressed that you'd actually think that an artist might be regarded by a hunky person or some kind of masculine figure as a nerd or a weakling or a wimp. And so he was quite impressed that this doctor thought, based on his muscles and based on just his physique, he thought, wow, this guy must be an iron worker. And we know that when he was on the docks, they mistook him for a barge captain. So he kind of is a physically fit dude because he works a lot. He's definitely not overweight, and he's quite a determined figure. He says, that's exactly what I've been trying to achieve. When I was younger, you could tell that my mind was overwrought. Now I look like a bargee or an iron worker. A bargee is someone who operates a barge. And now bear in mind, you've got to be quite fit to be a barge operator, because they're constantly unloading and uploading, or not uploading, loading onto and offloading, heavy things, machinery, wagon wheels, whatever, bales of produce. You've also got to secure those big boats to the docks, and that with those ropes, and you've got to get all of that going. He says, and changing one's constitution so that one gets a thick skin is no easy matter. So he's talking about literally getting a thick skin. That he's quite a sensitive dude. He was quite a quiet fellow when he was younger, and he's now trying to become, and he knows he needs to become a resilient artist if he's going to, pull this off. And I think he does achieve that. I think he does. I think in the law of art, I think he's one of the most resilient artists, and that's what's so ironic and so cargo. That's why it's so ironic and unfortunate and strange and twisted that he is known for being this troubled artist with mental illness or whatever, almost like because there's something, some weakness in him, that he cuts off his own ear and kills himself. It's almost the opposite to what he actually was. He actually handled being shot, and he handled his ear being cut off with a kind of resolution that most people, 90% of people, wouldn't be able to be capable of. Lorraine says he was happy but unhealthy. He was not eating and was not controlling his drinking. That's right. Hi, Deborah. Good to see you. I believe you're crocheting something. Okay. Aloha, Iceland. Thanks for joining us. I wonder where Stephanie is. I saw her earlier. Okay. Then he says, I must go on being careful, try to hold on to what I have and to improve on it still. Above all, I should like you to tell me if you think it absurd of me to suggest that now might be a good time. Now might be a good time for us to sow the seeds of a future business. I must admit, while I was out walking today with my dog, I was thinking, hypothetically, I'm not saying Theo is to blame. I'm simply saying, couldn't Theo have done more as an art dealer to sell his brother's work? And I was kind of thinking about various subjects. I was thinking about my life, but I was also thinking about the Murdos, how the Murdos do favors for one another, and they make life easier for one another. How if someone gets into trouble, the one bails the other one out, and they kind of get special treatment, right? You know what I'm saying? The whole Murdoch case is about everyone getting special treatment. And then I thought to myself, you know what? I think the opposite of that is Van Gogh. He didn't seem to be getting any special treatment. It's not like he sends his art to his brother, and his brother says, because I'm your bro, I'm going to do everything I can to sell this shitty artwork. You know what? Family is family, and I'm going to do my best to sell your stuff. And instead, you kind of get the idea that he sticks it under a bed and goes to work, right? Maybe here and there he made an effort to sell it, but you almost get the idea that maybe his boss said, you know what? I don't want to see one of your brother's works in the office or whatever it is, or in the sales room. But you've got to kind of wonder, couldn't or shouldn't Theo have done more to try and sell his brother's work? Was it just bad luck? Did he make an effort? It would be interesting to know. I'd be interested to know what his wife said about that. Whether Theo's wife complained. Sorry, whether Theo's wife knew that Theo complained about, geez, my brother's sending me this stuff. Does he really think it's going to sell? You know. Mel says, I don't think Theo did whatever he could for his brother. I'm just saying that I think maybe could have or should have tried harder. Terry, welcome. Good to see you. Tanny says he has been indirect with Theo. Okay. Yeah, they are different. So I'm just saying the thought occurred to me that maybe Theo, I don't think Theo gave his brother any special treatment, but maybe he could have or should have. It could also be if I was his brother, if I was Vincent's brother, certainly up until this moment now, I wouldn't really make that much of an effort to sell his work either, because I don't personally think it's very good. So for the only artwork that he's done so far that I sort of liked was that one of that sort of very yellowy one with the poplars. Honestly, that's about the only artwork I sort of thought isn't too bad. So maybe his brother was also just like, well, let's have this guy improve a little bit more. But even so, there is a point where he does start doing quite good work. It may also be that at the time that Vincent died, Theo was ready to start doing that. Who knows? Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. Bear in mind, Theo probably wouldn't want to lose his job either. You know, I'm trying to sell my brother's work, and the clients come in and they're like, "Are you crazy? Is this your brother's work?" You know, he could get into trouble with his boss. I think that's also true, and in a way, was a bad influence. Chelsea says, "I like the darker self-portrait." Do you? Okay, so let's continue. As far as so he's talking about maybe we should go into business together. This is almost like him saying, you know, try and sell my work kind of thing. As far as my present work is concerned, I feel I can do better. So there's a kind of an admission. You know what? If my work isn't selling, I can still improve. I do need more air and space. In other words, I must be able to spread my wings a little. Above all, he says it twice, I still haven't enough models. I could soon produce work of higher quality, but my expenses would be heavier. Still, one should aim at something lofty, genuine, something distinguished, shouldn't one? That would also make quite a good title. Do you agree? In fact, I think I'm going to make it the title so long. If I can find it, yeah, I'm going to quickly make this the title. So if we find a better title than that, then we can replace it. Okay. Tell me you're really making me hot. I'm going to put you down. Okay, it's not letting me do that. Let's try this. I've been wanting to do this video on installing solar panels, but I'm a little bit concerned about security. You know, like you can say, here is me putting solar panels on my home, and you can literally have someone looking at that and taking advantage, if you know what I mean. Someone can look at that and basically go, "Oh, is that where you live?" And I'm not sure if I want to do that, so I'm a little bit worried about that. I thought something that would be really easy, but it looks like it's not that easy. Okay. Okay, seem to have done it. Sorry about that. Okay, what do you guys say? Yeah, I have thought about that. Do it close up. Okay. Okay, so let's continue. So he says, the female figures I see among the people here impress me enormously, far more for the purpose of painting than having them. So there's a reference to sex, right? He says, the female figures I see among the people here impress me enormously, far more for the purpose of painting them than having them. Though, if the truth be told, I should like both, right? So there's a kind of a sly reference to the sly Van Gogh, which is, you know what, I want to paint these women and I want to sleep with them, right? And bear in mind, he doesn't really know them and they don't really know him. And he's kind of struggling in that sense. He's struggling to make friends and have relationships with women. Um, he can buy sex, I guess, but he can't seem to what's the word? He can't seem to um, get a woman to fall in love with him, put it that way. So a quick reference to that here. I'm again reading de Goncourt's book. It is first rate. In the preface to Chérie, which you should read, there's an account of what the de Goncourts went through. I get a sense a little bit of the loneliness of Van Gogh in that transition. He makes a very brief reference to something that's quite personal and quite private and probably quite intense in his life. And then he talks about reading. So it just shows you that he's spending a lot of time still scratching around on a canvas and staring at people and daydreaming and reading books. And but he's not really part of the actual social intercourse. He's sort of he's a lonely chap, right? And then he's talking about the books that he's reading, and he says, so he kind of wants to partake. He wants to bite into the fruit of life. He wants to be alive, right? He wants to have the full experience. And although to some extent by moving to a different place, he's seeing other people, is to some extent experiencing a different environment, is still nevertheless somewhat shut out, right? Anyway, it goes on to say there's an account of what the de Goncourts went through and of how at the end of their lives they were pessimistic, yes, but also sure of themselves, knowing what they had done, that they had done something that their work would last. What fellows they were. So he's drawing some inspiration here from another artist's or not artist, another author's work where where they talk about this. I'm just trying to think if it was Chérie there. I think it was a maid who had orgies and all sorts of things. She led this sort of double life. It seems like he's reading that for inspiration or something. So here is the book, Chéri Edmond de Goncourt, and it says not really much here. I don't really tell you too much about the book. Let's see if we can find something on Wikipedia. I think we can. Here it is. Here it is. My memory is not too bad. My eyesight, though, is not too good. I thought I saw this here. Oh, looks like I'm actually mistaken. I thought it was a reference to the most notable novel was Germini Lasseto, inspired, and that was written in 1865, inspired by the exploits of the brothers housekeeper Rose, who stole from them to fund a double life of orgies and sexual encounters. I think he was reading that when he met Dr. Gachet, and he actually gave Dr. Gachet that book. I don't actually see Chéri here. I thought I did. Didn't it say something about it being the last book? I don't actually see it here. Strange. Anyway, it does seem like their books are quite sexual, some of them, kind of about women's liberation. Anyway, I was hoping that I could tell you something about this book, but I actually can't seem to find anything. It was written in 1884. Can't really get much more information than that thus far. Yeah. So I don't know. Sorry, I wish I could help you guys out. I just can't really find anything more about it than this. Anyway, he's obviously raving about the book, and he says, by the way, I've been virtually fasting for 4 or 5 days at this year's end. So think about it. It's the end of the year, Christmas, New Year, and what's he doing? He's literally starving. He's literally seems like he's having sex and painting women not in exchange, but instead of eating. Doesn't it seem that way? Yeah, but even if it is here, you're not really going to get. You're not going to get. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. So the book is there, but I'm trying to get some information about the book. Anyway, So he goes on to say, you may well find it difficult to imagine, but it is a fact. When I receive the money, my greatest craving will not be for food. There you have it. There you have it. Though I shall have been fasting, but even more so for painting. And I shall immediately go on a hunt for models. Well, there you have it. If you give me money, I'm going to go and buy a model, basically. Model being a kind of a bit of a euphemism. And continue until all the money is gone, right? He's basically saying, I shall immediately go on a hunt for models and continue. What do you think? Continue with what? Hunting models until all the money is gone. Meanwhile, what will keep me going is my breakfast with the people where I live, and a cup of coffee and some bread in the creamery in the evening. This guy's kind of quite hardcore, right? He is willing to live in a pretty hard life to kind of have what he wants, right? Supplemented when I can by a second cup of coffee and bread in the creamery for my supper, or else some rye bread I keep in my trunk. As long as I'm painting, that is more than enough. So once again, you've got this sense that he can be pretty happy with very little, right? He can be pretty happy with very, very little. If he's starving, that's okay. As long as he's painting and effing, then he's pretty much satisfied, right? And so again, all of this nonsense that you hear from the art experts, that he found out that his brother was having a baby and that made him depressed. He found out that his brother was getting married and he was worried that there wouldn't be enough money. He's lived his whole life virtually destitute without money. It's ridiculous, really is ridiculous. So anyway, he goes on to say, the models here appeal to me because they're so completely unlike the models in the country. So I don't know what that means. Are they very experienced? Are they very, what's the word? Easy? Anyway, he says, and more especially because their character is completely different. And the contrast has given me some new ideas for the flesh colors in particular. Well, I'm sure that he's thinking in flesh colors, given what he's doing. He says, and though I'm still not satisfied with what I've achieved with my last head, it does differ from the early ones. I think you value the truth enough for me to speak freely to you, for much the same reasons that if I paint peasant women, I want them to be peasant women. So I want to get a whore's expression when I paint whores. Now, that is calling it like it is, you know. That is calling it like it is. Should I have that as the title of this video? What do you guys think? I'm going to make this the title for the time being, unless you find something. Not that this is a great title, but it's definitely a rare instance where he says something. Yeah, no, it absolutely is that. Definitely is that. Okay. So he says that is precisely why, wow, it's still going on about it. That is precisely why A Whore's Head by Rembrandt struck me so forcefully. So it's a bit of a shock, isn't it? It's a bit of a shock hearing him talk in this way. It's kind of disappointing, isn't it? He says, because he had caught that mysterious smile in such an infinitely beautiful way, with a gravity of his very own, the magician of magicians, right? So even when he's quite crass, he's kind of somewhat romantic. This is something new for me, and I want to achieve it at all costs. Manet has done it, and Courbet. Well, Sacre Bleu, I have the same ambition too. The more so, I felt the infinite beauty of the study of women by the giants of literature, Zola, Daudet, de Goncourt, Balzac, in the very marrow of my bones. Even Stevens fails to satisfy me because his women are not like any I know personally, and those he chooses are not the most interesting there are, I find. So this is quite a frank letter from him, it's quite a personal letter. He's not actually talking that much about art. He's talking about his appetites. Then he says, well, be that as it may, I want to get on at all costs, and I want to be myself. So again, bear in mind, it's near the end of the year. Around him, and it's important to bear this in mind because the ear incident 3 years later, right? It's now the end, coming to the end of 1885. The ear incident will happen at this time of the year in 1888. What is Vincent van Gogh doing? Well, all the people around him are, it's winter. All the people around him are, what's the word? Gathering with their families, and then the losers and have-nots are trying to find some way to enjoy themselves as well. And he's one of those losers, right? Also, his father died a couple of months ago, and this is kind of one of the ways that he wants to be himself, express himself, I guess. Then he says, I'm feeling obstinate too and no longer care what people say about me or my work. I think that's also important to bear in mind if you say Van Gogh committed suicide because he couldn't sell his art. Van Gogh committed suicide because he was despairing because all of his efforts weren't going anywhere. But even at this point, he's saying, I don't really care what people say about me or my work. And this isn't like something he felt once in one letter in 1886, 1885. You get the sense that he felt this way all along, don't you? Then he says, it seems more difficult to get a nude model here. The girl I use wouldn't do it at any rate. Of course, that wouldn't is probably relative, but you certainly can't take it for granted. Still, the fact is she would be splendid. So he seems to be daydreaming, aiming for, hoping for, counting on the woman he's painting taking their clothes off. And maybe he's going to be hearing, you know what, the girls in Paris take their clothes off, the girls here don't. Anyway, he says, from a business point of view, if I can only say that we are in what people have already begun to call that the women have the same charm as at the time of revolution, and just as much to say, and that one would be whatever if one worked without them. It is the same everywhere in the country as much as in the city. One has to take women into account if one wants to be up to date. Goodbye, have a happy new year, with a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. So I must say, this entire letter has kind of been about sex, hasn't it? So that brings us to, is it the next year? Early January 1886. I'm going to come back. I'm just going to run a quick errand. I'll be back with you guys in about a minute or two. Samir, what you doing? Okay, so we are literally 2 months from Paris right now. So we're going to go through January, and then I think we are in Paris by sometime in February. So we've got 2 months to go through. How are you guys doing? Okay, guys, are you guys ready to continue? Dear Theo, it's already late, so it's early in the new year, but I will not put off acknowledging the good receipt of your letter with enclosed 150 francs. So, you know what? His brother hasn't been like, oh, so you using my money to screw around. I'm going to give you 20 francs the next time. He actually sends his brother quite a lot of money. 150 francs is is a fair amount of money, and it might sort of be a New Year's gift, right? But certainly, um, they're on the same page, I guess, in a sense. Then he says, let me, let me begin by answering your question of some time ago about the picture by Frank. And then he talks about that. The color is warm, reddish, blah, blah, blah. The shadows in the flesh are very strong. I could not get near enough to analyze the technique close up. The head of Christ is less conventional than the Flemish painters usually conceive of it. I imagine I can also do it in that way, and the picture did not tell me anything new. Then he says there's a painted window which I think superb, very, very curious. A beach, a green sea with a castle on the rocks, a sparkling blue sky of the most beautiful tones of blue, greenish, whitish, deeper, higher of tone. An enormous three-master, quaint and phantasmal, stands out against the sky, diffusion everywhere, light in the dark, dark in the light. In the blue, a figure of the Holy Virgin, bright yellow, white, orange. Higher up the window reappears dark green with black with fiery red. Well, do you remember? It is very beautiful, and ladies would certainly have fallen in love with it, or James Tissot in his old style, or Taste Maris. I saw some pictures brought for the Musée Moderne by Verhaas and Farassane. It talks about a market in Cairo. Let's see if we can have a look at that. I think I found it. Well, I found it, but I've got to go through 142 pages of an auction catalog. So this is a Christie's auction page, and I don't know how long do you think we should spend looking for a market in Cairo? It's one of these. You think it's going to be one of the early ones? I don't think that's a market in Cairo. I don't think that's it. So I don't know if one of you want to go through this and see if you can find, yeah, and see if you can find it. I don't know if any of you want to do that. If you've got a separate screen, or if you want to do it on your own time, you can let me know on what page it is. Maybe we can find it. Shall we go through another 5 more pages? Okay, can't find it. Okay. I tried. The Faraz looks well at all events. It is a clever picture, daring of color in a light color scheme. Several beautiful combinations, including a figure in orange against light blue, light green, and white. Thanks, Stephanie. I'm working on my portraits all the time, and at last I've made two which are decidedly good likenesses. One profile and one three-quarter. That isn't everything. It isn't even the most important thing. I'm going to need to sneeze. Okay, I'm back. In the deposition from the cross by Van Dyck, the large one, that one high up, there's also a portrait, decidedly a portrait, not only of a head, but thank God, of a whole figure. Let's see if we can find this one. It becomes a bit anemic in a way, if that's the word, when you can't actually see these paintings that they're talking about. I think this is the one that he's talking about. I think it might be this one. I think that's the one he's talking about. Now, I must say it's incredible. These are fairly old artworks, and it's quite incredible how much detail are in these expressions. And how comparatively little detail is in his own art. So if he is getting inspiration from this, his work is definitely far, far, far inferior. I mean, compare all of these faces and expressions and how vivid these colors are. Compare that to, for example, this. I mean, you can really not even compare it, right? Yeah, color. And an Ingres, a David, who has painted, certainly did not always paint beautifully, yet how remarkably interesting even they become when putting their pedantry aside. Now, just tell me, always supposing that you want to be a financier, and I have nothing against it, it is even a thing that I highly approve of. But are you quite satisfied with your own argument when at the beginning of the year you say, to my disappointment, I have so much to pay, you must try to manage till the end of the month? So there's a rare admission from Theo that I've got bills to pay. And also, Van Gogh doesn't get this letter and then commit suicide. That's the story that was told earlier, was that he was made aware that his brother was struggling financially and he couldn't handle it. Well, his brother had been kind of struggling to some extent all along, right? It's not really anything new. And anyway, he's not terribly happy to hear this. And he says, just listen, this is what I have to say against it, and just think over whether I'm right or not. Now, bear in mind, his brother's saying, I've got so much to pay. Can you try and just manage? And what's going to happen in 2 months is he's literally going to move in with his brother, right? Talk about, what's the word? Airs and graces in a way, right? Anyway, so he says, just listen, this is what I have to say against it. Am I less than your creditors? Who must wait, they or I? So this is where Van Gogh is quite a good lawyer. He can make sometimes quite a good argument. He says, a creditor is no friend, to be sure. And I, even if you do not know it for sure, at least I am perhaps. right? In other words, he's saying, but I'm a friend of yours. I'm kind of, so in a way, he is asking for special treatment, right? He says, do you realize how heavy are my burdens, which the work demands every day, how difficult it is to get the models? Now, you'd imagine that Theo would say, you know what, take the money, just stop effing around, rather paint landscapes, they're free. He goes on to say, do you know how expensive the painting materials are? Do you realize that sometimes it is almost literally impossible for me to keep going? And that I must paint, that too much depends on my continuing to work on here with and a plume immediately and without hesitation. Can you see there a lot of questions, question marks, in the next line, exclamation marks? He's kind of like getting quite triggered, right? He says, too much hesitation might make me fall in a way which I could not redress for a long time. My situation is threatened from every side, and it can only be saved by working on vigorously. The color bill is like a millstone around my neck, and yet I must go on. Now, you know what? You could almost imagine that he wrote this letter as his very last letter, and then he took his own life, but he didn't, right? And so this is his response when he's worried, when he's anxious, when he's concerned. He says so. If he's not worried or concerned, then he doesn't say so. So why does he not communicate that in the last summer in Auvers-sur-Oise, right? He says, I too must keep people waiting, and without mercy, they will get their money, but they will have to wait. I pass the sentence on them. The less credit they give, the longer they will have to wait. The only way to win at present is with very good work, with something that is not ordinary. That's also quite a extraordinary statement that he makes, a very portentous statement. So if the previous letter was about sex, this letter is kind of about money. He says that higher work costs more in money, in trouble, and in strenuous exertion. But now more than ever, it is the only way. What I tell you is simple and clear. Do you understand or don't you that I'm perfectly right when I point out to you the absolute necessity of having my studio full of very good heads if I want to get orders for portraits here? Now, on its own, each of these letters are quite convincing. On its own, individually, each of these letters make quite a good argument. But after the 10th, 20th, 30th, 50th, 100th letter, where he doesn't actually sell anything, it kind of gets a bit old, right? You know what I mean? He's working quite hard, but they're not really any results, and they're not going to be any results. So he goes on to say, now shall we say like impotent dullards and blockheads, we cannot do it, we have no money, there's nothing to it, I tell you no, right? So there is another, there's more evidence of his psychology, which is to say, why should money be an impediment? Why should I allow money to determine an outcome? Right? He has been reckless with his money. But he's basically saying, you know, why let money be an obstacle? This is what we'll say, and please let's both say it together. Now, bear in mind, he's totally dependent on Theo for money, and bear in mind, he's trying to make it like him and Theo coming up with the same decision. Anyway, he says, personally, we will endure poverty for it and suffer want as long as it is necessary, like one does in a besieged city, which one does not intend to surrender, but we will show that we are men, right? It's quite a powerful argument, definitely quite a powerful argument. And that's another thing where he acknowledges over here, my situation is threatened from every side. My color bill is like a millstone around my neck, etc., etc. Here he says, I'm not going to surrender. I'm not going to give up. I will suffer as long as it is necessary. This is our strong and resilient he is already at 32 years of age. He didn't get weaker, he only got stronger from this point. Right? He's got a strong spirit. Yeah, that is the bottom line. It's actually not his money, but it is quite a strong argument. He says either one is brave or one is a coward. We must carry things to such a height that the public begins to like it. I mean, for instance, that the girls will begin to like having their portraits painted. I'm sure that there are some who want them. Today I spoke to a photographer's assistant. Again, a reminder of the milieu in which they are finding themselves, that photography is just coming online, and he's now got to differentiate his art from a photographic portrait. So it's almost like if you look at the picture behind me, what is the difference between that and that's actually not a photo, it's just somewhat photoreal. But compare that to this, right? Quite a difference. Kristen says it's a powerful argument. Okay. So he says, I wanted a commission for every woman he would bring to me for a portrait. I let the matter rest only insofar that I did not promise any commission before I knew my man somewhat better. But I shall see him soon again soon. And then I shall see if I can do anything with him directly. Okay, next paragraph. Well, I shall see later on, but the most urgent thing is that I have some fine heads to show. I must also try to make acquaintances among the prostitutes, which is not a pleasant task when one has a purse with very little in it. I can assure you it is no pleasure then. But it is not taking trouble that I'm afraid of, but I believe that you have so accustomed yourself to thinking it all right that I'm always to be neglected. Right? Is in a way speaking quite directly to his brother, basically saying, you know what, and remember what I said earlier, you sort of wonder whether Theo did enough to help his brother, because he is an art dealer. And yeah, you kind of have him saying, I believe that you have so accustomed yourself to thinking it all right that I'm always to be neglected, that you forget too easily how I've not had my due for so many years already, right? That is again confirmation that he didn't just start suffering in December 1888. He didn't suddenly start having a hard time either in the asylum or in Orvez. There he says it. I've not had my due for so many years already. This is before 1886. Is used to duress, is used to struggle, is used to it. He doesn't like it. To some extent, he's signed up for it. But he also doesn't want it necessarily to be harder, much harder than it already is, right? And that my wanting to enlarge my business is not only good for me, but for you too, because only in that way can I earn something. And now another thing, theoretically at least, you say that it is necessary to be well dressed and so on for the occasions when one has to go and see people. Well, the time has come when it is necessary even for me, who, as you know, am not keen on such things. Are such things necessary or not? Does anything depend on it? Yes or no? Now, I have to say, I disagree with Van Gogh on this. Um, I disagree with him on this. If he had been a bit more well dressed, they may have taken him a bit more seriously as an artist. So that's the other thing, is his brother is giving him advice. Theo's giving Vincent advice, and Vincent's basically saying, if you don't tell me what to do. Meanwhile, Vincent's telling his brother what to do. He's telling his brother how to deal with him. He says, and well, the time has come for it. Oh, sorry. Then he says, well, given that period of having to break through, the monthly allowance is too small for me to possibly make both ends meet. You are thrifty yourself. You understand what is absolutely needed. And I ask you, can one do what is absolutely necessary with what remains for one's own use after paying for painting materials, models, and rent? If I had some friends, if I were little known, yes, then it would be easier. But I have no friends, and it's my job to try and make them. Well, here you have it in basically in black and white. He says, I have no friends. You're my only friend, really. And obviously, and I kind of know how he feels, because when you are moving around, then you've got to make new friends, establish new relationships. And every time you move, you've got to begin that process anew. And he is about to go to Paris. So no matter what friends he makes in Antwerp, he's going to have to start all of that again in Paris. And no matter which friends he makes in Paris, he's going to have to start that all over again in Arles. And then the one friend he does have in Arles, Paul Gauguin, he's going to lose, and then he's going to go to the asylum alone, and then he's going to have to start that whole process of making friends again in Orvez. And he actually does quite well in Orvez. He makes a friend with Dr. Gachet, although it's a bit not ideal. I think he makes a friend with Dr. Gachet's daughter, and sort of has a friendly and amicable relationship with the innkeeper and the innkeeper's family. But the point is, because he's so itinerant, he struggles to have relationships, right? And I found, I became successful when I finally sort of settled down. What I'm talking about is I was moving literally every couple of months, and only in the period where I was in one place, where I recognized that you need that stability, did I start to achieve success. It really is important. Anyway, it says, but do not let me forget to thank you for sending the second volume of de Concord's book. It is a delightful thing to be able to study that period from which so much can be learned. I cannot tell you how glad I am that I went to Antwerp and how many remarkable things there are here for me, who has been out of it for all so long. So can you imagine how frustrating it must be? You are coming from the countryside. You're like this country bumpkin. You were on this journey to be a pastor, and you were literally going with that, starving, didn't have clothes, clean clothes. You were living like a kind of a tramp, and um, and then the whole thing in Newnan, where his father and his family disapproved of him, he feels like he's been on a long purgatory, and now that he returns from that, he doesn't really have any money, um, you know, and that's kind of frustrating. He sort of feels like, I need money to live. I need money beyond paying rent, kind of thing, right? And he's just trying to come alive. He's just trying to come alive as a person, and he's kind of struggling in that sense. He sees people around him living their lives, having their lives, and he's trying to come alive. It's in a way the same situation Brian Koberger found himself in, but um, this guy's a lot more resilient. Van Gogh is a lot more resilient in terms of his psychology. Then he says, how glad I am to see the city again, much as I like the peasants in the country. How the bringing together of contrast gives me new ideas. The contrast between the absolute quiet of the country and the bustle here. I needed it so badly. Now, what's quite interesting is when he goes to Paris, that bustle is going to become too much for him. And even when he came back from after the whole time in the asylum, he actually found the bustle in Paris like overwhelming. At the moment, he likes the bustle. He is sort of a 32-year-old and he's felt locked out of the sort of, social intercourse. And now he wants that bustle. But he will eventually leave Paris because the bustle becomes something that he doesn't like. He wants something lesser than that bustle. Then he says, if only I could bring home to you how much more satisfaction you yourself might find, how much more you would be a friend to me if, instead of that frigid and unkind slighting and keeping me at a distance, only think of last summer and the preceding summers, you could at long last gain the conviction that this is not the right way. Always to be in a state of exile, forever having to make great efforts, always half measures, but never mind. The family stranger than strangers is one fact. I'm quite sure what he means by that. And being through with Holland is a second fact. It is quite a relief. You know what he's talking about there? He's saying, I'm done with Holland. I'm not going home. I'm done with my family. I want to live now, right? He's kind of saying that. Lisa, good to have you here. Welcome. Yeah, must be frustrating. He goes on to say, that is my only feeling, and yet I have been so deeply attached to it all, that at first the estrangement drove me crazy. But I've looked over the cards too narrowly to let myself hesitate now. I think when he says that, that's kind of a, what do you call it? It's I don't think he's literally looking at tarot cards, but it's a symbolic reference to that. He's talking about seeing the portent, seeing the future in some of the circumstances in the cards that has been dealt. He said, I have got my self-confidence and serenity back. So can you see, in the middle of adversity, in the middle of his brothers saying, I don't have money, he's saying, you know what, I'm confident. He's not saying, I give up. Retrogression, I abhor it, right? That's another, he's not just like throwing in the towel, giving up, becomes gloomy, becomes despondent, despairs. He's fighting back. He is a fighter, he's a fighting spirit. As far as you are concerned, you are still dangling between the two parties, and I've always told you that your character will have to set in a definite mold, that you still will have to go through an inner struggle and possibly a social struggle for the sake of your position, both more serious than you ever went through in the past. Fighting words to his brother, right? I know you think this merciless to those at home, and yet I tell you that at times Father himself felt vaguely that he had made a mistake and had taken the wrong side. But he tried to reconcile irreconcilable things. I think he's actually talking about God in a way, that his father trying to reconcile irreconcilable things. I think he's talking about his father may have had, what's the word? Doubts in terms of his faith. He says he had not as much firmness of character as he seemed to have, and as I thought him to have when I was a boy, and even later. Oh well. As to and that's quite interesting, him saying that, and it's another vague reference, another rare reference to his father. And bear in mind, he paints the Bible representing his father, and he paints a secular book right next to that, almost as though, although it's father and son, that secular volume is also saying maybe father had this other side to him as well. Maybe it's touching on that as well. Anyway, as to the Tesseract exhibition, if ever a man was wronged, it is he. To mention another at the same time, I do not wait for exhibitions to form an opinion about painters. Chaplin will also have to be recognized. As to Tessaract's color, is a harmonist, and his work painted almost in one tone is beautiful because of the modeling, because of the delicate intuition of the female forms, because of something passionate in the expressions. And I think he belongs to the race of the Greuses and Proudhons, better, more modern, more serious in sentiment, blah, blah, blah. Let's have a look at Jerome's The Prisoner. Let's have a look at that. Stephanie, did you ever find that artwork we were looking for? So here it is, Jerome's The Prisoner. What do you guys think? Thanks for trying, Stephanie. I guess this is the prisoner over here, right? So let's see if we can find, I quite like that. Let's see if we can find The Russian Camp by Jerome. Is it Jerome? Is it this? I think it's this. Yeah, there it is. If you look at these colors, this is back to the potato eaters, greens and browns, right? Not much besides that. Look at all those tents there in the background over here. This almost looks like a fairground. Not quite sure what's going on there. Are those flags? And then let's have a look at these Syrian shepherds. He seems almost to be criticizing him for being sterile. I'm not sure if he's saying the art's really that good. Okay, I actually quite like this. Have a look at this. The Syrian shepherds. What do you think of that? So can you see this is a figure on a horse, and then there's is it a flock of goats? And then there's a camel kind of in the dust, and then there's looks like a sheepdog, some kind of dog, and then a little bit of color in the corner there. So it just shows you how educated Van Gogh is as an artist, that he can just reel off these artisan artworks off the top of his head. You know, he really knows his subject quite well. He's still a bit of a shitty artist, but he certainly is an astute student of his, of the subject matter, right? Okay. See, so sometimes it is worth looking at some of these images. It says, I must finish. What color is in a picture? Enthusiasm is in life. That is a great quote. That might also have been a really good title for this episode. And I think it's something to consider if you Instagram, if you if you are in a particular landscape, if you wear certain clothing as well. Think about what that communicates about your enthusiasm, right? Think about Team Peachtree. The color is to communicate enthusiasm, energy, life, right? It is no little thing to try to keep that enthusiasm. And that is kind of my message to you guys. That's the message in The Murder of Vincent van Gogh, this book, right? This book that I've got over here. Oh, this is the cover, right? Is that Van Gogh doesn't lose his enthusiasm, right? He, despite all the pressures and troubles and trials and tribulations, he maintains his focus. He maintains his ambition. He maintains his. He stays the course, right? And I think it's the world projecting their own cynicism, their own crap onto him. I want to think of him as a troubled artist. I want to, and that's actually not who he is. It's what people see. It's not the real person. So he says, because of the models this month, I think I shall go and see Verlat, who is the director of the Academia, and I must see what the conditions are and if one could work there from the nude. I'm sure you'd like to. I shall take a portrait and some drawings with me then. I have an immense longing to improve my knowledge of the nude, okay? I have seen a large bronze group by Lambu, two figures, a man embracing a woman, superb. I wonder if we can see that. Is it a sculpture? Lambu sculpture, bronze sculpture. I see baseball play or football players. I can't find what he's talking about. Okay. Okay. I often envy the sculptors, but it is somewhat the same everywhere. I ought to be able to earn more in order to be able to work more. I must also tell you that in view of that longing to study the figure, in case I should not succeed here, I should rather go further away than go back to Holland. And that is not an empty statement that he's making here, where he says, if I don't succeed here, I'll rather go further away than go back to Holland. And that's exactly what he does. He does go to Paris, and once he goes to Paris, he goes even further south. And here he says, that further might perhaps be Paris without any hesitation. So here, for the first time, so he's not just making empty statements. He's saying that he's thinking about going to Paris, right? You may be of the opinion that I am an impossible character. You know, at least whatever you want to say about Van Gogh, he's self-aware. He knows that he is a somewhat eccentric person. But he says, that's absolutely your own business. So can you see he's like not going to deal with criticism. He says, for instance, I need not care and I'm not going to. I know that your business routine induces you again and again to lapse into the old evil with regard to me. What I seek is so straightforward that in the end you cannot but give in. So let's conclude by saying the sooner the better. So can you see how when his brother says to him, you know what, you're going to need to try and make do with 150 francs. He gets this big moaning letter saying, basically wagging his finger at him. And so you can almost imagine his brother eventually giving up on it's just easier to send the money than get these lecture letters, right? He says, goodbye with a handshake. Ever yours, Vincent. As to the end of the month, I beg you most kindly, let one of your creditors wait at least for 50 francs. They can stand it, but please do not let it be me, for even then it will still be tough for me. Again, quite a good legal argument if you want to see it that way. So we go from early January. One wonders how Theo is going to respond to that. So now we jump to the middle of January. Dear Theo, last Sunday I saw for the first time the two large pictures by Rubens, and as I'd looked at those in the museum repeatedly and at my ease, these two, the deposition from the cross and the elevation of the cross, were the more interesting. Nothing touches me less than Rubens expressing human sorrow. Let's see if we can have a look at Rubens' elevation of the cross. Yeah, that's just quite an epic painting. So he says, nothing touches me less than Rubens expressing human sorrow. That's quite a weird thing to say. Anyway, that's the painting that he's referring to. So it actually seems as though he is not, he doesn't like it, I guess. It's almost like he's saying he's not convinced. He's not, it doesn't resonate with him. I suppose you could say that it's a very, very busy picture, and in that sense, it's quite unrealistic. Maybe he feels it's like over the top. And I guess there's so many references to what's the word that he uses? Human sorrow. There are quite a few references to that. Look at that face. Look at that face. Look at that face. That face. It does seem a bit. There's even a dog over here. It does seem a bit gratuitous. He has a baby doing whatever it's doing. There's another little child. This definitely does seem a bit over the top. Here's a horse. So Van Gogh doesn't like this kind of, I guess, ostentatious art. But in a way, I quite like this, just in the sense that it's taking a moment and making it global, making it kind of epic. I understand where Van Gogh's coming from, but yeah, in a way, I see it in a slightly different way. Anyway, he says, to explain my meaning more clearly, let me begin by saying that even his most beautiful weeping Magdalens or Mater Dolorosas always simply remind me of the tears of a beautiful prostitute who has caught a venereal disease or some such small misery of human life. As such, they are masterly, but one must not look for more in them. Rubens is extraordinary in painting ordinary, beautiful women, but he is not dramatic in the expression. Compare him, for instance, to that head by Rembrandt in the Lacaze collection, to the man's figure in The Jewish Bride. Okay. You will understand what I mean, as for instance, that his 8 pompous figures of fellows performing a feat of strength with a heavy wooden cross in the elevation, so he describes it as pompous figures, seem absurd to me from the standpoint of modern analysis of human passions and feelings. That Rubens' expressions, especially of the men, are superficial, hollow, pompous, yes, altogether conventional. But I still love it because he, Rubens, is the very man who tries to express and really succeeds in expressing a mood of cheerfulness, of serenity, of sorrow, by the combination of colors, though sometimes his figures may be hollow. Thus, in the elevation of the cross, the pale spot of the corpse in a high accent of light is dramatic in its contrast to the rest, which is kept in such a low color scale. So it is quite interesting getting Van Gogh to give us, in a way, an art lecture on what constitutes good aspects in a painting and what aspects he doesn't appreciate. And what he's trying to say here is that one successful thing in this artwork is the contrast of this sort of darkness of the earth over here. It's almost black, and even this guy seems to be wearing a black shawl or something, and he contrasts this blackness with white, this darkness here with white, and you've even got some injury there that you can see quite visibly. Now, if you look at the figures around him, the figures around him have that brown potato look about them over here, and it's only the Christ figure that's got his skin white and the whites of his eyes as well. Do you see that? You don't really see much that is as white in the other figures. Look at all these other figures, and you don't really see white. There's a gray horse, and all of these figures are tan, but the Christ figure stands out because light is falling on his body, and it is very light. There is shadow, like over here, but look at the darkness there and the blackness over there, and then the whiteness of this as well. So that is, I guess, what he is complementing, is the contrast. Right? Dramatic in its contrast. And he's talking about the whiteness on Christ, right? And the rest is kept in a low color scale. On the same order, but in my opinion, far more beautiful, is the charm of the deposition from the cross, where the pale spot is repeated in the blonde hair, the fair face, and so on. Once again, Delacroix has tried to make people believe in the symphonies of the colors, and one would almost say in vain if one remembers how almost everybody understands by good color the correctness of the local color, the narrow-minded exactness which neither Rembrandt nor Millet nor Delacroix nor whoever else, neither Manet or Courbet, has aimed at as little as Rubens or Veronese. I've also seen several other pictures by Rubens in various churches. It's very interesting to study Rubens because his technique is so very simple, or rather seems to be so. His means are so simple, and he paints and particularly draws with such a quick hand and without any hesitation. But portraits and heads and figures of women are his speciality. There he is deep and intimate too, and how fresh his pictures remain because of the very simplicity of his technique. Now, can you see how there's been a bit of a roller coaster ride in Van Gogh's letters. We've had the sex letter, we've had the money letter, and now it seems like he's back to sort of waxing lyrical about color, right? It's quite interesting how you have that ebb and flow. So he goes on to say, I feel increasingly inclined to do all my figure studies over again, very calmly and quietly without any nervous hurry. I want to progress so far in the knowledge of the nude and the structure of the figure that I might be able to work from memory. I should still like to work sometime either at Verlat's or in some other studio, besides working for myself as much as possible from the model. For the moment, I've deposited 5 pictures, 2 portraits, 2 landscapes, and 1 still life in Verlat's painting class at the Academy. I've just been there again, but he was not there either time. But I shall soon be able to tell you the result, and I hope that I shall be allowed to paint from the model all day at the Academy, which will make things easier for me as the models are so awfully expensive. So if you guys want to follow with me, I'll put a link in chat. I don't know whether he's angry in this letter. I wouldn't say that. Okay. So he goes on to say, I must find something to help me in that respect. At all events, I think I shall remain in Antwerp for some time instead of going back to the country. He's kind of been saying this, repeating this. That would be much better than putting it off. And here there is so much more chance of finding people who would perhaps interest themselves in it. I feel that I dare undertake something and can achieve something, and things have been dragging on far too long already. You get angry when I expostulate with you, or rather, you don't give a damn. Or maybe he is a bit angry. He says, and all the rest of it, which we know by now. And yet, I believe a time will come when of your own accord, you will come to the conclusion that you have been too weak to persevere in trying to help me regain some credit with some people. It's quite strange that I didn't read this letter and have that thought I had, but I just was thinking about Van Gogh and I was thinking, did Theo do enough for Van Gogh, for his brother? And yeah, you actually have his brother saying that. You've been too weak in persevering to try to help me. Haven't you ever had that feeling with a family member where you sort of you don't want special treatment, but you at least want to be treated fairly and reasonably and properly, and you feel like, wow, I don't really deserve that, or that's not really fair, you know. And Yeri is remarking on that. He says, never mind, we are not faced by the past, but by the future. And again, I tell you, I'm convinced that time will make you see that if only there'd been more cordiality and warmth between us, we might have built a business of our own together, even if you had stayed with Gupil and Key. Indeed, you said to me that you know perfectly well you will be rewarded with stinking ingratitude. But are you quite sure this isn't a misunderstanding of the type Father himself labored under? So it seems in his work situation, and this is not the first time we're going to come across this. Um, Theo feels like he's not being um, afforded the respect that he perhaps should that he deserves, right? Yeah, that's right, Bridget. Okay. So in a way, I think maybe Theo identifies a little bit with Vincent. It's different. Vincent's trying to sell art, and there's this kind of stinking ingratitude from the people around him. They don't appreciate what he's doing, but basically he's doing a lot of work without reward. Theo, in a way, is in the same boat. He's also doing a lot of work and is not really getting any gratitude or whatever from his bosses. But I think the fact is the art market was being, in a way, artificially subdued because people were buying photographic portraits. Anyway, he says, and there was a bit of uncertainty in terms of the art market. That was the other thing. He says, I for one shall not take it lying down. You can be sure of that. For there is still much work to be done even at present. There is another, you should really make a list of how often he basically says, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to let this get me down. I'm not going to take this lying down. He says it over and over again. By the way, do you guys know that Iceland in a Wise husband is a expressionist painter? Did you guys know that? Should go and have a look at her husband's Instagram page. I don't know if you want to put a link to it in chat. Is the hand okay? Was it like a quick singe or did he have to go to hospital? Well, bear in mind his brother's wife's not on the scene just yet. Well, not as far as we know. Okay, I'm just trying to see what Iceland says. Blister. Imagine there was a lot of crying. A burn is painful. I once, when I bred birds, I wanted to put a big log into this aviary, and I didn't have a saw. So I had the genius idea to burn through the log, and I put the log over a paint can, but a big paint can, like the size of a bucket. And so it started to burn through the log, and then I wanted to turn the paint can slightly, and the paint can was metal, and I just for a moment didn't think, and I put my hand against this thing, and the skin on my hand for a moment was like plastic, burnt plastic, and although I just touched it in an instant, it was enough to seriously cause a blister like you're talking about. And I ran, it was the middle of winter, I ran to the swimming pool. Even though I'd taken my hand away from this can, this metal can, it felt like it was still touching it. And I went and stuck my hand in the swimming pool. And yeah, anyway, I remember that pretty well. We hope that he's going to heal okay. Have you got some kind of cream that helps skin to heal? Ouch. Okay. The other day I saw for the first time a fragment of Zola's new book, Louvre, which, as you know, appears as a serial on Le Gil Blas. I guess that's some kind of magazine or newspaper. I think that this novel, if it penetrates the art world somewhat, may do some good. The fragment I read was very striking. When you get right down to admit it, I'll admit that when one is working exclusively from nature, something more is needed, the facility of composing, the knowledge of the figure. But after all, I do not believe I've been drudging absolutely in vain all these years. Can you see he's got faith in himself? Come, come, boy. Hey, come. So hot, but someone wants his mother and child moment, eh? Aren't you hot? I feel a certain power within me because wherever I may be, I shall always have an aim, painting people as I see and know them. Whether Impressionism has already had its last say or not, to stick to the term Impressionism, I always imagine that many new artists in the figure may arise and begin to think it more and more desirable that in a difficult time like the present, one seeks one's security in the deeper understanding of the highest art. So you can see that he is aware of Impressionism. He certainly is aware of it um, in theory, but he's going to become very aware of it in practice in Paris. He's aware of it in a hypothetical sense, right? For there is, relatively speaking, higher and lower art. People are more important than anything else and are, in fact, much more difficult to paint too. I will try hard to make acquaintances here, and I think that if I worked some time, for instance, under Verlat, I would learn to know better what is going on here and how to fit in the rest. You see, he is aware he needs to try and meet people. He needs to try and establish relationships. So he says, so let me struggle along my own way, and for heaven's sake, do not lose courage and do not slacken. I do not think you can reasonably expect me to go back to the country for the sake of perhaps 50 francs a month less, seeing that the whole series of future years will depend so much on the relations I must establish in town, either here in Antwerp or later on in Paris. I must say the impression I get from him is that, uh, you know what, a more mercenary person may have said, where's my inheritance? Like, I'm struggling financially. Where's my inheritance from dad? You know what I mean? And yet he doesn't even, he's not even kind of trying to maintain links with his mother or sisters. You know, in a way, if he was a more manipulative, shallow person, he would have tried to you know, make his life easier by getting his inheritance. But it's almost like he just said, you know what, I'm out of here, and hopefully Theo's going to look after me. But kind of a gamble that he's taking. And that's the other side, is isn't Theo going to inherit some money um, that's going to make his life easier? And maybe another part of it is that can sometimes take time. It can take time to for that process to complete. That could be another issue. But there's not even any word of it in his letters. Then he says, I wish I could make you understand how probable it is that there will be great changes in the art trade, and consequently many new chances will present themselves too if one has something original to show. Now, I must say, something I read that I wanted to share with you guys was an article by Boris Becker. I wonder if I can quickly find it. But basically, he was saying Boris Becker recently went to prison for, I think, tax evasion, and he was basically he had this interview with a journalist, and he basically said to him, you know, do you regret anything? And he said, like a tennis player's got to try. You're saying only the best tennis players can forget about the double fault and the point that cost them this or whatever. And because when you can do that, then you are open to um, remember not remembering. If you're able to put that behind you, then you can actually be open to the next opportunity that comes along. And the same is true in life. The longer you mourn the or regret the whatever that happened in the past, the greater the chance that you're going to miss another opportunity that is bound to come your way, right? Something that you can probably say to young people that are mourning a mistake they made. The longer you do that, the more you compound that, because another opportunity is coming your way. Let me just see if I can find the exact words that he uses. So it's this article, and I'm just not sure if I'm going to be able to find it very quickly because it's a really long article. Just give me a second. I'm just going to. Here it is. Because this is really it's worthwhile just sort of paying attention to this. So he says, inside, meaning in jail, he learned acceptance. If you look back too much and you get downhearted and you accuse the judge or the jury or God knows who else, you're not going to get closure. The hardest thing in tennis is to forget the double fault or the missed chances, and most players can't. Only the very good ones clean them out and really look forward to the next chance. That's what I'm doing. Isn't that a wonderful sentiment? So you kind of tend to need to subscribe to this. I'm not sure if it'll allow you to read it, but don't you think it's a wonderful sentiment? Can you guys read that? Can you guys read that? Okay, so let's go back to the article. So he says, it is no fault or crime of mine if I must sometimes tell you we must put more vigor into such and such a thing. And if we haven't got the money ourselves, right, is kind of making it, if we haven't got the money ourselves, we must find friends and new relations. I must earn a little more or have some more friends, preferably both. That is the way to success, but recently it has been too hard for me. As for this month, I absolutely insist on you sending me at least another 50 francs. At present, I'm losing weight, and moreover, my clothes are getting too shabby. You know yourself that it isn't right as it is. Yet I feel sort of confident that we shall pull through. But you wrote that if I fell ill, we should be worse off. I hope it will not come to that, but I should like to have a little more ease just to prevent illness. Just think how many people there are who exist without ever having the slightest idea what care is, and who always keep on thinking that everything will turn out for the best, as if there were no people starving or completely ruined. I begin to object more and more to your pretending to be a financier and thinking me exactly the opposite. All people are not alike, and if one does not understand that in drawing up accounts, some time must have passed over the account before one can be sure to have counted right. If one does not understand this, one is no calculator. And a broader insight into finances is exactly what characterizes many modern financiers, namely not pinching, but allowing freedom of action. Now, what you kind of get in these letters is and it's not just this letter, it's not the letter before it, and it's not just the letter after it, but Van Gogh is laying the groundwork for what will end up being an incredible and unlikely relationship between himself and his brother. That his brother will continue to look after him, even though it is so almost counterintuitive. Would you look after someone who keeps demanding money, no matter what it was for, and just ultimately never had anything to show for it? Would you keep sending them money? Wouldn't you feel like you being taken for a ride? Wouldn't you feel like you being used, right? And somehow Theo doesn't feel like he's being used. And I think to some extent he is being used, but also Van Gogh is painting. It's not like he's just doing something else. And isn't it wonderful that Theo did what he did? I mean, if you take Theo out of the story, I don't think there is a Vincent van Gogh. If you just took Theo right out of it, then I don't think you would have Vincent van Gogh. So Theo, we have much to be thankful for, right? I know, Theo, that you may also be rather harder, but your life has never been so hard as mine has been these last 10 or 12 years. again, there you have it in black and white. Are you telling me that Van Gogh suddenly realized he was going to have a hard life in June, July 1890, and then he committed suicide? Are you telling me that he suddenly realized life is so tough in all? It had a tough 10, 12 years, right? And in a way tougher than, a lot tougher than it was in Orvez and all, right? In all he had a pal, right? And things were going actually quite well. In Orvez, he had another pal, Dr. Gachet, and he was seeing his brother every other weekend. And his art was doing really, really well. And around about that time, he even sold an artwork, you know, and he got favorable reviews. He says, and I mentions Paris again, it's about the third, fourth time he mentions it. He says, can't you make allowances for me when I say perhaps it has been long enough now? Meanwhile, I've learned something that I did not know before that has renewed all my chances, and I protest against my always being neglected. And if I should like to live again in the city for some time and afterward perhaps to work in a studio in Paris too, would you try to prevent this? So this is one of the first times, in a way, it seems like he's saying, okay, so if you don't have enough money to put me up in Antwerp, I should maybe just live with you. Then you don't have to pay money for me to live somewhere else. I'll just live with you. Would you try to prevent this? So it's kind of a bit of is speculating, is trying to get, is kind of getting a little bit of a feel for what he can get away with Theo. Then he says, be honest enough to let me go my own way, for I tell you that I do not want to quarrel. I will not quarrel, but I will not be hampered in my career. And what I can do in the country, unless I go there with money for models, what can I do? There's no chance, absolutely none, of making money with my work in the country. And there is such a chance in the city. So I'm not safe before I've made friends in the city. Excuse me, and that comes first. Now, although he's making the case about that, he's eventually going to leave the city in order to go and work in a country town or a town, put it that way. And then he would later on work in another town after that. So in a way, it's not strictly speaking true what he's saying. Anyway, for the moment, this may complicate things somewhat, but after all, it is the only way, and going back to the country now would end in stagnation. Okay. We had 2 hours. It's so hot where I'm sitting. How many letters left before we get to Paris? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So yeah, 14 letters to go, guys. 14 letters. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read 14 letters. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. Okay, let's deal with this one. Dear Theo, I want to tell you that Verlat has at last seen my work, and when he saw the 2 landscapes and the still life I had brought from the country, he said, yes, but that does not concern me. When I showed him the two portraits, he said, that is different. If it is a figure painting, you may come. So tomorrow I shall start working in the Academy's painting class. Besides, I've arranged with Fink, a pupil of Leys, by whom I saw things in the matter of Leys medieval, to draw works of antiquity in the evening. I think neither of these things will do me harm, and perhaps can be of some use to me, either in painting or in drawing. And at all events, it is an attempt to come into contact with people. In the painting and drawing class, I saw in passing several fellows my age at work. And if I might get on friendly terms with Verlat or Fink or whoever it may be, it would certainly get me a lot of models. Well, this is essentially the practical side of the matter. Then I have to go and see two fellows about portraits. I do not know what the result will be. One is a question of two portraits of a couple of very beautiful hussies. Types with dark eyes, dark hair, two sisters who I suppose are kept women. Do you guys know what hussies are? You guys know what hussies are? It's a minx, a flirt, a seductress, a Jezebel, a vamp, but it's someone where there's a bit of a sexual thing, a brazen little hussy. Quite interesting turn of phrase there. The other one is a portrait of a married woman, but I repeat, there's nothing definite and it may come to nothing. But I know that eventually I would be willing to do them for nothing, just for practice. But just consider whether I must go and work there or anywhere else. It is necessary for me to do something about my clothes. Glad that he's figured that one out, for I've worn mine for 2 years now. And especially of late, they've had much wear and tear. Even a suit for some 40 francs would do. And I must also be prepared for Verlat saying I have to provide myself with some painting material or other, so that I must have the means to do so. Therefore, try, as I asked you, to send me another 50 francs, then I can keep going till the end of the month. I could buy a new pair of trousers and a waistcoat at once, and the coat in February. It is very cold here, and most of the time I feel far from well. But as long as the painting flourishes, it doesn't matter much. Now, I must say, not being certain that someone's going to send him money must be a great source of anxiety. And if the source of anxiety is extreme enough, severe enough, then that can be stress. And stress can actually be something that can affect his immunity, something that can affect his health. When I traveled through Australia and I ran out of money, I was eventually coughing blood. It was just, you just knew that you are living, I don't know, you're just in a very precarious situation. And then you can't sleep and you are in a constant state of anxiety, and it does have a very severe impact on you. I've been drawing there for 2 evenings already, and I must say that I believe that just for the making of, for instance, peasant figures, it is very useful to draw from the plaster casts. But for goodness sake, not the way it is usually done. In fact, in my opinion, the drawings that I see there are all hopelessly bad and absolutely wrong. And I know for sure that mine are totally different. Time must show who is right. The feeling of what ancient sculpture is, damn it, not one of them has it. I, who for years had not seen any good plaster casts of ancient sculptures, and those they have here are very good, and who during all those years have always had the living model before me, I'm looking at them carefully again. I'm amazed at the ancients' wonderful knowledge and the correctness of their sentiment. Well, probably the academic gentleman will accuse me of heresy, but never mind. I should like to get on with Verlat. I think many of the things he makes both harsh and wrong in color and paint, but I know that he also has his good days. For instance, that he paints a better portrait than most of the others. So we must wait and see. I feel in high spirits, notwithstanding all, just because it refreshes me to be in all kinds of conditions so desperate from those in the country. And it may be that I shall feel at home here after all. but do your best to write me soon. And it is really necessary that I get those 50 francs for this month. Otherwise, I cannot manage and things are too urgent. Goodbye. Ever yours, Vincent. 22nd January. It's quite a short letter. Dear Theo, I've now been painting at the Academy for a few days, and I must say that I like it pretty well, especially because there are all kinds of painters there, and I see them work in the most varied ways, something I've never experienced before. I mean, seeing others work. And you would have that experience in the Yellow House as well, seeing Paul Gauguin at work and Paul Gauguin seeing him at work. It would be by far the best thing for me to stay here a long time, for their models are good. He's saying this at the end of January, and he's only going to end up being there 1 more month. It will save a great deal of expenses of painting and models, and it is much more difficult than you seem to know, especially if one works alone. But let's hope that in this way things will improve. Next Monday, we shall get new models. In fact, I shall begin in earnest. And for Monday, I ought to have had a large canvas. They also told me that I must definitely have other brushes. I don't have any money left, so it is really pressing, and I wish you would do what you can, for I'm also doing what I can. And almost all the time, it is such that hardly anything is left for food. In the evening, now I must also tell you, I've worked to such an extent that I was eating rice, right? I've been in that position myself as a freelancer. Anyway, he goes on to say, don't worry, it didn't last for very long. I fortunately got myself out of that situation. The painting class is better, and as I think I wrote you already, there are all kinds of people and of all ages, about 5 of them even older than I am. I'm working for the moment on a child's head. It would be a relief to me if I could have your letter before Monday. What I wrote to you about the clothes I want is also rather urgent. You can imagine if he's going to this academy, then he definitely does have to look respectable. I've already made a few acquaintances who have seen the things I'd brought for their admission. Among the studies of former pupils that are hanging there are some damn good ones. You kind of get the idea, because he's getting out a little bit and because he's at this academy, he has less time to read and to ruminate, and so his letters are a bit shorter. I do not think I can take a shorter cut to make progress, and whether I go to the country afterward or to a studio in Paris, again mentioning Paris. At all events, it is a good thing to see many others paint, and especially to work regularly from the model as much as ever is possible. So what's happening now is he's getting a sense that, and this is just before he goes to Paris, he's getting a sense that it's useful talking to other artists. It's useful seeing what other artists are doing. It's useful interacting with other artists. And then the penny must be dropping that how much more so could he have this experience in Paris, right? Okay, so then he goes on to say, bye, Kristen. Kristen says, I'll try to make it back. Everyone have a wonderful night. Thanks a lot. Okay, so yeah, thanks, Bridget. Then he says, I'll write you in a hurry because I must get to work, but try your best not to keep me waiting, for the work depends on it, and I assure you, in any case, it'll be hard enough for me. Okay, so this is going to be the last letter. It's the last letter from January, and then it's 1 month to Paris. Okay. Whew. Dear Theo, I've already delayed too long in telling you of the safe receipt of your letter and enclosure. In any case, I think it will do no harm if we see each other in Paris after a while. As to your letter, it is always the same, and as I see it, in judging me, you relied too much on generalities and prejudices, which are too superficial and too incorrect for me to believe you'll cling to them forever. So this is some of the most prickly we've seen him. Is actually saying not terribly nice things to Theo. Look at that. As to your letter, it's always the same. Judging me, and you rely on generalities. I've been tremendously busy this week, for besides the painting class, I go on and draw in the evening too, and after that, from 10:30 till 11:30, I work from the model at a club. For I have become a member of not less than 2 of these clubs, and I now know 2 fellows who draw well, I think both Dutchmen. This week I painted a very large thing with 2 nude torsos, 2 wrestlers posed by Verlat, and I like that very much. That painting is also lost. There actually is a painting Van Gogh did of 2 wrestlers. Let's have a look. I think it's this one. Can you guys see that? So a hidden Vincent van Gogh portrait has been recreated using artificial intelligence more than 135 years after it was covered over. It was discovered 10 years ago beneath a still life painting by the same artist. It shows 2 men locked in combat. I wonder if it's going to show us the original. So 2 wrestlers, here it is, was found behind the 1886 painting Still Life with Meadow Flowers and Roses. That's this one. Just found behind this picture. Quite a nice picture. Okay. The same with the drawing from the plaster casts. I've now finished 2 large figures. At all events, there are 2 things to be said for it. In the first place, it interests me, after having drawn for years from fully clothed models, to see the nude again and the works of the ancients, and to verify things. In the second place, to be accepted somewhere in Paris, one must have worked somewhere else before and not be absolutely green anymore. And one is always involved with people who have already worked at an academy for a longer, shorter time. Again, he's talking about Paris. The advice Verlat gives me is very severe, and also what Funk of the drawing class tells me, and they strongly advise me, especially to draw for at least a year, if possible, to draw nothing but plaster casts and the nude, and that this would be the shortest way, and I shall then go back to my other outdoor work or my portraits, quite a different man. And I believe it is true. So I must try to be somewhere where both plaster casts and nude models are within my reach, at least at first. Seems to be a hint that I must try to be where you can get plaster casts and nude models. The best one in the class has done the same, and he says that with each study he felt he was making progress. I've noticed it myself in his old things and his recent ones. I'm not going to go through all of this. Then he says that method, Millet 2 draws in the same way more than anybody else, is perhaps the root of all figure painting. It depends enormously on that drawing, the modeling directly with a brush, quite a different conception from that of Bouguereau and others who lack interior modeling, who are flat compared with Géricault and Delacroix and do not emerge from the paint. It is to find this, about which I would not care to speak with Verlat nor with Fink, that I'm working. No fear they would teach me this, for the fault of both of them is in the color. When I compare study of mine with those of the other fellows, it is curious to see that they have almost nothing in common. Theirs have about the same color as the flesh. So seen close up, they are very correct. But if one stands back a little, they appear painfully flat. All that pink and delicate yellow, soft in itself, produces a harsh effect. The way I do it from nearby, it is a greenish red, yellowish gray, white black, and many neutral tints, and most of them colors one cannot define. But when one stands back a little, it emerges from the paint, and there is airiness around it, and a certain vibrating light falls on it. So can you see that is exactly what he's ultimately known for and what he ultimately does convey. He's talking about vibrating light, right? He's trying to put movement, vitality, energy, electricity into his painting. He doesn't want a flat, like tree and a mountain, kind of a flat painting. He wants his art to have life, have movement, right? He's trying to animate his art, right? And that is exactly what he's trying to convey here, right? You see that? I mean, he's talking about this in early 1886. He must be thinking, a photograph is a flat, dead, sterile thing. It just captures a moment. What can an artist contribute beyond the flatness of a photo? And this is his answer to that. At the same time, the least little touch of color, which one may use as a highlight, is effective in it. What I lack is practice. I must paint about 50 of them. I think I shall have reached something then. Now I put the colors on somewhat too painstakingly because I haven't had enough practice. I must hesitate too long, and so I work the life out of it. But that is a question of time, of exercise, till the touch becomes more intimately correct, more immediately correct. The better one, he says, till the touch becomes more immediately correct, the better one has it fixed in one's mind. Some of the fellows have seen my drawings. One of them, influenced by the drawing of my peasant figures, has started at once to draw the model in the nude class with a much more vigorous modeling, putting the shadows down firmly. He showed me this drawing and we talked it over. It was full of life and it was the finest drawing I've seen here by any of the fellows. Do you know what I think of it here? The teacher Siebert expressly sent for him and told him that if he dared to do it again in the same way, it would be considered to be mocking his teacher. And I assure you, it was the only drawing that was well done. So yeah, you get a really strong sense that Van Gogh is kind of a revolutionary artist, right? So you see how things are. However, it doesn't matter, and one must not get angry at it, but pretend one should like to cure oneself of the bad habit. So it's almost like he's in this fake, like trying to be authentic in a fake crime environment. He's trying to be an authentic artist in a particular environment that he where his work really sticks out. It's not conforming. And he doesn't, don't you think he does come across as quite an authentic figure? He says, well, don't get angry about it. You just pretend that you should like to cure oneself of the bad habit. Pretend. But unfortunately, one falls back into it all the time. The figures they draw are almost always top heavy and are toppling overhead first. Not a single one is standing on its own feet. He doesn't like how fake and false and unrealistic their work is. He says, and that standing must already be fixed in the very first planning. Well, I'm still very pleased that I came here, whatever may happen, and whatever the results may be, whether I get along with Verlat or not. I find here the friction of ideas I want. I get a fresh look at my own work, can judge better where the weak points are, which enables me to correct them. But I most urgently beg you, for the sake of a good result, to lose neither your patience nor your good spirits. It would be fouling our own nest if we lost courage at the very moment that might give us a certain influence, if we show that we know what we want and dare to do something and to carry it through. Some interesting words there. It would be fouling our own nest if we lost courage at the very moment that might give us a certain influence, if we show that we know what we want and dare to do something and to carry it through. As to the money, if I work in the studio and so don't have to pay the expenses for models, even then 150 francs is certainly not much. For painting is very expensive, but it can be done if one economizes even on food. If models must be paid, 150 francs is definitely not enough and one loses time. So the cheapest way is to go on in the studio, seeing that, especially for more elaborate studies from the nude, it is impossible to provide the models oneself. I do not think it impossible that in the long run, especially if the other fellows can't help beginning to draw stronger shadows, that then Verlat or someone else will pick a fight with me, even if I systematically try to avoid it, which I certainly shall do systematically because it is to my advantage to stay here for some time. I'm longing to hear about your apartment. Okay, he's again talking about Paris. As for me, if I come to Paris, I shall be perfectly contented with a cheap little room in some remote quarter, Montmartre, or a garret in a hotel, but that is relatively unimportant, and we aren't yet that far. First, let's stay here for some time, and don't let's worry before it's time. The winter course ends on March 31st. Well, there you kind of have it. Looks like he's going to he's going to leave Belgium a month before his course actually ends. So he's definitely thinking about Paris. He's definitely talking about Paris. He's definitely going to be in Paris in about a month's time. Okay, that's it from me. Silent Murmur says, I forgot to mention that in the dark, excessive painting that Vincent disliked, everyone's eyes share a vague sentimental gaze. It is a good way of describing it. So I must apologize. The past two Van Gogh letters, I've been meaning to share photos of the weaver bird, and unfortunately, it looks like the installation of the solar was enough of a interference that he's now left the garden. It is quite tragic, quite sad. But I mean, it was a full day of panels crashing through the undergrowth and rising up on ladders right beside the nest. And although he still comes to my garden and he still tears off palm strips, and although the two nests, one well made, one not so well made, I think he's basically finally abandoned his project here. So it is quite sad. I am trying to lure him back with it's a kind of it's like a ball with seeds in it, and I put it in like a cage. But yeah, I think I think he was a little bit frightened by like 5, 6 people ascending right next to the tree, almost like magic, up and down for a full day, like jeepers. I thought human beings run around on the ground. Yeah, they are above my nest. What's going on here? You know what I mean? So I think he was a bit appalled by that. And if he wasn't appalled, the female definitely was. So yeah, I have taken photos. I've just gotten like sometimes when I try and edit a video and try and sync it, it can literally take half a day. And sometimes I don't really care about it syncing imperfectly, but other times I put a bit more effort in, and literally does take hours and hours. Today was one of those days, so sorry about that. Okay, so that is it from me. So we know that 38, Van Gogh Letters 38 continues on the 3rd of February. So that should be quite interesting. Bear in mind, as soon as we get to Paris, his letters actually in a way stop. So from there, time starts racing by. We're going to go through months at a hair-raising sort of pace. So if you feel a little bit bored, you feel like this is not moving very quickly, you should fasten your seatbelts, because as soon as we're through with this period, things are going to start flying by like in super quick succession. So yeah, that's where we are. Yeah, I will. I'll try my best to do them in the next episode. Incidentally, some of you may have seen this picture, maybe some of you haven't. That is me. I really didn't have enough sleep. I don't know if you can see, I'm a little bit tired, but that's me at the Kröller-Müller Museum in the Netherlands, in front of a original Van Gogh self-portrait. And you can see there's quite a lot of color in this picture as well. So yeah, there you have it. Thought I would just share that with you guys. Someone asked me at the beginning of this, are you related? What do you guys think? He's got a bit of a funny nose, quite a big nose, but I suppose from the side, mine is maybe similar. You also get a sense of that nose in this, when you look at this book, right? You get a sense of the nose in this book as well. I don't think my nose is that crooked, but anyway. Cool. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for joining me. If you know anyone who likes Van Gogh, please share this video onto, I don't know, whatever, a Van Gogh thing on Facebook or Reddit or whatever, if you know of anything like that. What else can I say? I really appreciated reading your comments, Stephanie, about the Netflix docu-series. I actually was going to do it in 3 parts, and then I don't know if I will. I guess if there's a lot of interest in the video I've just put up, then I might cover that whole thing, dealing with the framing and all that. But it was interesting seeing what stood out to you guys. Quite a lot more to say about it. I am a bit tired, as it's 2:30 in the morning here. I really need to get to bed. But yeah, I might continue the analysis of the whole murder thing a little bit later. There's also an incredible article on Mo Wilson in Outside Magazine. Very, very long article. It actually reads like it's long enough to be a short book, to be honest. But it provides a little bit of additional insight into that case that I've never seen before. So I'll try and touch on that when I've got some time, maybe tomorrow. So look out for that. Yeah, it is upsetting. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jean. Okay. Kristen, thanks for being here. Iceland, we're all thinking about your little boy. I hope his hand's going to be okay. I'm going to get some sleep. Thanks. Thanks, Renee. Cool. Okay, guys. I'm going to bid you guys adieu. I'm not going to call Timmy over. I think he is in dreamland. So let's sleeping dogs lie, right? Okay, guys, take care. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Remember, I think something's happening on Brazilian TV tonight. as soon as I see something, I'll pass it on to you guys. So look out for that. Cheers, guys. Take care. Ciao.